welcome to today's video in which we'll talk about life at Versailles. Louis XIV's decision to move the court out of the Palais du Louvre and the Tuileries Palace and into Versailles would shape France's history for many years. At Versailles, Louis XIV completed the style of government that was later called absolutism. With the Fronde still in the back of his head, Louis wanted to prevent future uprisings by the nobles. So he brought the entire nobility to court. This made a possible opposition from a distance against the king almost impossible. The members of the nobility were politically disempowered and compensated in return with precious gifts and sumptuous celebrations. The once powerful high nobility of France now got into debt in order to keep up with the times and to follow the latest fashions of the court. Being assigned an apartment in Versailles was a significant privilege that also gave the illusion of being at the center of power in government. Etiquette played an important role in court life. Posts, titles and offices could only be gained by being at court, and those who distanced themselves from the Sun King ran the risk of losing privileges and rank. For this reason, the aristocracy resided at Versailles almost constantly, trying to please the king. This ensured that at times several thousand people lived at the château at the same time. For French society, the move of aristocracy from the countryside to the Versailles court meant a heavy burden in the long run. Largely released from their old duties and the responsibilities of governing the provinces, the aristocracy soon led a decadent existence. While the third estate, also known as the commoners, had to bear the tax burden and the work, the nobility could, or rather had to, indulge in idleness. This circumstance would become one of the triggers of the French Revolution over 100 years later. Louis XIV followed a strictly regulated daily routine. The whole day was organized by court ceremony. At all times, the king was surrounded by dignitaries. He distributed tokens of favor by granting small ceremonial tasks or privileges, allowing or withdrawing individuals from participating in certain ceremonies or festivities, and in this way knew how to control the entire French nobility and to keep them in check. After the death of Louis XIV in 1715 and during the reign of Philippe II d'Orléans in the name of Louis XV, who was still a child at the time, the court left Versailles and went to Paris. They returned to Versailles in 1723. Louis XV and Louis XVI also resided in Versailles, so that from 1682 the palace was almost permanently inhabited. At the end of the Ancien Régime, the court comprised of approximately 10,000 people, of whom 5,000 lived directly in the château. The actual courtiers made up around 1,000 people. The others were chambermaids, cooks, bodyguards, and other servants. The palace was a city under one great roof, with apartments, workrooms, and places of entertainment. Traders took up residence in the corridors and courtyards. The castle was almost constantly overcrowded, and the aristocracy, if they did not belong to the royal family, were impoverished due to the Versailles lifestyle. Many of them even lived in the narrow attic chambers of the upper floors or in the neighboring Grand Commune, since Louis XIV insisted they would all have a place to sleep. The château was not reserved for the nobility alone. The common people also had access. The curious were called voyeux by the residents. The higher the rank of the visitor, the further he was allowed to get into the interior of the castle. However, free access to Versailles did not mean contact with the people who lived there. Anyone who came as a petitioner or hoped for an office had to be officially presented to the court, which in addition to a documented title, usually required the help of an already established courtier. Despite the sumptuous furnishings, Versailles was an uncomfortable palace. The draughty and high rooms, which were lined up en filade, were difficult to heat. In the harsh winter of 1709, the cold inside the chateau even made liquor bottles burst. The large mirror gallery had no chimneys, and Louis XIV's central bedroom was so cold that Louis XV had a private bedroom set up elsewhere in the château where he went to sleep after the couchette ceremony. As was common in all of Europe at the time, there was no running water nor permanently installed toilets in the castle. People had to relieve themselves in body chairs and chamber pots, the contents of which were emptied by the servants into 29 septic tanks in the vicinity of the chateau. Louis XVI had France's first flush toilet installed. The chateau repeatedly struggled with rats and mice infestations, and once a year the court went to Fontainebleau so that Versailles could be thoroughly cleaned. The supply of the court with food and drink required the presence of several hundreds of employees. Members of the royal family and courtiers of high rank were supplied from the king's kitchen. Various courtiers were obliged to hold open tables for other chateau residents to attend, while other courtiers had to take care of food themselves. The meals came partly from the inns in the vicinity of the chateau and partly from the self-organized kitchens, of which more and more appeared in the courtyards and under the roof of the castle over time. Life at Versailles meant having no privacy. The royal family themselves ate every meal in front of an audience, and the confinements of queens were traditionally public events within court society, so much so that Marie Antoinette's life was in danger during the birth of her first child, when too many people occupied her bedroom. Etiquette governed and described every event ranging from grand celebrations and receptions to such everyday things as lunch. There were also rules to follow in the event of illness and death. When Louis XV fell ill with smallpox in the Trianon in 1774, he was rushed to the château to die in front of the court. Through this system, the king received an almost divine veneration and, quite intentionally, was separated from the people and underlined his superior position. To serve the king was to serve France. Helping him to get up with the lever, simply handing him his shirt, was considered the greatest honor to be bestowed upon a courtier. Whether one was allowed to stand, sit, or speak in the presence of the king, and even through which door one entered his bedroom, indicated one's rank at the court, which was visible to all present. Etiquette applied not only to dealing with the king, but also to every duke, every prince and every courtier. The protocol regulated the dealings with one another and assigned each member of the court a place within this society that was visible to all. An example of the strict regulated court ceremony is the following anecdote, which was handed down by Madame Campan, the Queen's chambermaid, and which described Marie Antoinette's everyday life at Versailles. During the Queen's levée, the lady-in-waiting had the right to hand the Queen her shirt while she was getting dressed. The palace lady put on her petticoat and dress. But if a princess of the royal family happened to join them, she had the right to help the Queen into her shirt. So once the Queen had been completely undressed by her ladies, her maid was holding the shirt and had just presented it to the lady-in-waiting when the Duchesse d'Orléans entered. The lady-in-waiting returned the shirt to the maid, who was about to hand it over to the Duchess when the higher-ranking Countess of Provence arrived. Now the shirt went back to the maid, and it was not until the shirt was in the hands of the Countess of Provence that the Queen finally received it. The whole time she had to stand naked as God created her and watch the women over-compliment themselves about the shirt. The court aristocracy, which was mostly stripped of all power and purpose, needed to be entertained, and Versailles entertainment included magnificent balls, parties, and tournaments for this purpose. The king himself regularly organized game evenings in his apartments. In addition to the permanent banquets, masked balls, and opera performances, there were various festivals lasting several days, which were meant to increase the fame of the king through their pomp and the number of invited guests. Aside from parties and festivals, Versailles also served as the political center of France. Ambassadors from many European countries, as well as delegations from, amongst others, Siam and Persia, were received. The various treaties of Versailles also bear witness to the importance of the château. The royal families of France lived at Versailles until October 5th, 1789. That day, Versailles was stormed and the king and his family were forced to leave. They would never return. In the following years, the château was partially looted by revolutionaries and became largely empty. After the revolution, the castle remained empty for a while. Napoleon considered converting Versailles into a residence again, but his plans were never carried out, and the emperor finally contented himself with the Grand Trianon for residential purposes. During the government of Louis Philippe, the château was restored, and the French European History Museum was set up within its walls. Versailles also gained special importance for Franco-German history. The German Empire was founded at Versailles on January 18, 1871, when King Wilhelm I of Prussia was proclaimed German Emperor Wilhelm I in the Hall of Mirrors. After the First World War, the peace treaty which the defeated German Reich had to sign in 1919 was negotiated at Versailles. The terms of the Versailles Treaty, which held Germany solely to blame for the war, are seen as one of the reasons for the political rise of the National Socialists. On June 26, 1978, Breton separatists carried out a bomb attack on the château, which they believed was a symbol of French centralism. After 2 a.m., an explosion took place, completely destroying the facilities in 3 rooms and wreaking havoc in 7 others. The damage to the property was estimated at 5 million francs. Nowadays, Versailles is open to visitors. It is the most visited castle in France, making it one of the country's biggest tourist attractions, with an average of 3 million visitors annually. For more information about the kings that inhabited Versailles, you can click on the suggestions above. Thank you for watching. See you next week with more on the Bourbon dynasty.